singing is a prayer in and of itself, so I hope you join me for that. I want to take a little bit of time today, and Richard will be back in a little bit, but I want to take a little bit of time today in light of everything that's going on to talk about finding refuge. And you know, each of us longs to feel safe and to trust in that sense of well-being. We long to find refuge and know that all is well. So it's kind of interesting at a time like this where probably most of you, like me, I had never heard the word social distancing, nor had I lived in such a time as this. And so I've been thinking about this, what appears to be paradoxical state of being, where rightfully so, we are practicing social distancing. What I hope and pray is that hand in hand with that, we're deepening our spiritual connection, our connection to our source, our connection to one another, and our connection to well-being. And that's what we want to talk about a little bit today, about how that feels, especially in a time when I know many of you have called. If you spend any time on social media, you know that fear is running rampant. And so how to find refuge and find comfort in these times. I read this week where someone was talking about the Apollo 13, that when the Apollo 13 experienced danger, the oxygen tank failed and not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves. This is the most important of all journeys, and without it, all others are useless. And so today we want to talk about crossing that abyss, the illusion of that abyss, and how do we find that sense of connectedness? How do we find and live in that state of refuge? I believe that there are many doorways, but I want to talk about 3 ways today of finding and living with a state of finding refuge and living with peace. The 3 ways of finding refuge is, number 1, the living truth. Number 2, the light of self-awareness. And number 3, the love of connection. The light of truth, the love of self-awareness, the living truth, the light of self-awareness, and the love of connection. And if you look at these, life, light, and love, each word is synonymous with God. That all of these are doorways into divine awareness. They're doorways into the presence of God. The writer of Psalms, I think, said it beautifully when they said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my source, my rock. Here I take refuge." And finding refuge is in the living truth, is in the light of self-awareness and the love of connection. And so we want to look at those, and I think it's always helpful before we actually look at those to step back a minute and say, well, what are the temporary places we turn for what has been called in the Buddhist terms false refuge? What are the temporary strategies we employ and perhaps have been employing recently to make us feel safe? I'll give you a minute to think about that. What are some strategies that you've been playing out in hopes of finding refuge and feeling safe? Some of them are controlling, trying to get everything out here under control. Apparently right now, some of them are buying toilet paper. I still can't quite make that connection, but whatever it is that seems to make people feel safe, stocking up on stuff. Some of the strategies we employ are blaming. One that I know I tend to employ is busy, busy, busy doing, busy being busy. And it's a human response that when something is happening, we want to do something. But being mindful about, is our doing getting in the way? Is it a false coping strategy? Other false strategies are, false refuge are obsessing, as if it's sort of due diligence that we're supposed to worry and obsess. Worrying and obsessing are very different than bringing mindfulness to what's going on and responding wise and compassionately. And then there are the vices of food, sex, drugs, rock and roll, as they say, alcohol, Netflix, whatever. I remember a number of years ago living in eastern North Carolina when a hurricane was predicted, and the hurricane did come through and created a lot of damage. I was at the grocery store when they were predicting it. It felt like everybody else, and we were buying supplies. But in front of me was a woman with a cart full of beer. And I was right behind her, so when she got up to check out and started unloading all of that beer, the clerk said, "Are you having a hurricane party?" And the woman said, "No, I don't intend to even know if we have a hurricane." And everyone that heard her chuckled a little bit, and the clerk said, "Well, I guess that's one coping strategy." And it's comical, but it's funny, the coping strategies that we employ when times become a bit challenging. And so to really know that there's an inherent part of life that is dealing with uncertainty, that is dealing with feeling vulnerable, and how do we practice wise action and yet remain compassionate and connected. And so where do you take refuge, and where do you find peace? What do you tell yourself? What do you pursue? And how can we look at the living truth, God, the light of self-awareness, God, and the love of connection, God, as doorways into divine awareness and a presence that allows us true refuge? So let's look at the first. Finding refuge in the living truth, God. Again, Psalm says, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God. In this I take refuge." Ultimately, if you really think about it, there's no sure way, there's no outer refuge that you can count on to keep you eternally protected and safe and alive and happy. That life has its inherent uncertainty, its inherent vulnerability, that life also has death at some point in time. And learning to find peace in the awareness of all of that, I think that's what the spiritual journey is about. It's about forgetting and remembering and forgetting and remembering. Albert Einstein, one of the brightest minds of our time, said, "I think the most important question facing humanity is the universe a friendly place?" He said, "This is the first and most basic question all people must answer for themselves. For if we decide the universe is an unfriendly place, then we will use our technology, our scientific discoveries, our natural resources to achieve safety and power. By creating bigger walls to keep out the unfriendliness and bigger weapons to destroy all that is unfriendly and we believe could harm us." He said, "If we decide that the universe is neither friendly nor unfriendly and that God is essentially playing dice with the universe, then we're simply victims." He said, "But God doesn't play dice with the universe." He said, "If we decide that the universe is a friendly place, it's music, it's dance, it's whatever sacred ritual helps you remember and connect that you are a part of this living process." You know, if we look at the life of Jesus, who had and was known as an individual who was very powerful and very peaceful, the lion and the lamb, I believe Jesus demonstrated great power, great presence, great peacefulness, because he knew he had access to that it wasn't something he could grasp or hold on to and had to fight that it may go away, but he knew that he was innately connected with that. And rather than reacting to life, he became a creator of life, and I think that's what we're called to do. It's sort of like, you know, on any given day, there are different weather patterns that can move through the atmosphere. And yet the atmosphere remains. Understanding that we are connected, that we find refuge in the God of our being, we find refuge in our source, is finding refuge in that space where the storms of life, the different weather patterns may show up, but ultimately they're going to blow through. But being connected to that space, that in God we live and move and have our being, to know that you are connected and you are intricately a part of that space. That's what it means to find refuge and to to take refuge in the living truth and the God of your being. The second way then is finding refuge in the light of awareness. Self-awareness with a capital S, I like to say, God awareness. And coming to understand that it's our own essence, our deepest essence and timeless presence, that there's a dimension of us that can always be at peace, that knows we are connected, and how to be fully present with all of that. There's so many different things going on in our society right now. There's a story that I read about a story that I read just recently about staying connected and having that feeling of being connected. It's a story about a grandmother, and I want to share that story with you if I can find it. The story that I'm referring to about all of us being able to connect to that inner sense of knowing the truth of who we are. There was a grandmother that had been keeping her grandchildren, and they had gotten quite rambunctious, and finally she was glad to be able to put them to bed, all three of them. And after she put them to bed, she went downstairs and she put on some loose pants and a floppy shirt. And she went and she washed her hair, and after she washed it, she wrapped a towel on it, and then she put on a face mask and was going to sit down for a few minutes. And then she had heard the kids got rambunctious again. So she went upstairs and opened up the door and said, "I told you to be quiet." And the children got really quiet, and she closed the door. And when she left, the littlest one said, "Who was that?" and didn't recognize the grandma because how she was in that moment. Well, sometimes all of us have those times where we can't even recognize ourselves. We forget who we are, and we're not able to show up as our best self. But finding refuge is about living in the light of self-awareness, where we realize that beyond our mistakes, beyond our flaws, beyond our forgetfulness, beyond the times that we show up acting out of fear or jealousy or anger or hurt, that beyond those times, they think of them like a weather pattern that's passing through. There's a dimension in which we live and move and have our being where we are always connected. And we can call that God and source, but it's also to understand that it's a dimension of who we are. It's a dimension of ourself. Several years ago, when I was going through a challenging time, someone gave me the book Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. It's one of my favorite books of true stories. She is a doctor who works with individuals, often patients who are terminally ill, drastically sick, or on the verge of dying. And she told a story about one of the angriest people she had ever worked with. She talked about a young man who had had a cancer in his right leg, and this young man in high school and in college was a great athlete. He was very handsome, very fit. He was a very good athlete. And at the time of his diagnosis, he felt like everything in his life was going right. And what happened in that time is he wound up having to have his leg amputated. It saved his life, his physical life, but this young man felt like it ruined his life as he knew it. And he was so depressed, and he began to act out. He began to drink, and he was basically throwing his life away. And his parents, out of desperation, finally got him in to see Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. And she talked about meeting him and seeing his anger. And in one of her early meetings, she gave him a piece of paper, and she said, "I'd like for you just to feel in, and I want you to draw yourself." And what this young man drew, he drew a vase, and then he drew this big black crack in it. And then he just crumpled it up and threw it on the floor. And he said, "That's what I am. I'm broken. Everything about me is broken. I'm no good." And they continued to work and talk, and eventually the young man asked a question one day. He said, "Well, what do other young people do who have experienced stuff like this?" And Dr. Remen suggested that he go to the local hospital and start volunteering. And after some time, he agreed that he would do that. And so he tells a story of one day he went into a room with a young woman who had just had a double mastectomy. She had had breast cancer. And she, as a young woman, was so devastated when he went in her room, she would not even lift up her eyes and look at him. And he came back and he was talking and joking, and she wouldn't look up. And finally, this young man who had lost his leg and who was learning to walk with a prosthetic leg, this young man, out of desperation, just unhooked his leg, let it fall on the floor, and started jumping around one leg, dancing. And finally, this young woman looked up and laughed. She said, "Fella, if you can dance, then maybe I can sing." Well, as you may imagine, long story short, the two of them really connected, and as time went on, they became engaged and they got married. But before they got married, Dr. Riemann had this young man come back into her office, and she said, "I'd love to check in with you now, and I'd like to give you this picture, and has anything changed? Has anything changed in your life and how you see yourself?" And he said, "Yes." And he asked her if she had a yellow highlighter, and she did. And he opened up that piece of paper, and where he had drawn that black crack, he began to draw yellow, bright pieces of light. And he said that what I have learned in my life is that the brokenness is where the light comes forth. And that's such a truth for all of us to remember, that it is in those places that we feel most broken that that's where the light comes out. And so, how are we finding refuge in our self-awareness? Rumi said, "Don't turn away, keep your light on the wounded place. That's where the light enters you." And so, we ask ourselves, what about my nature, what about my being is causing me perhaps a false sense of refuge or a complete lack of refuge? And what if I knew it to be true? What if I knew it to be true ultimately about myself? It would bring a sense of peace, a sense of connectedness. The Irish philosopher John Donahue said, "You can never love another person unless you're equally involved in the beautiful but difficult spiritual work of learning to love yourself. There is within each of us at the soul level an enriching fountain of love." And so we take a minute and maybe close your eyes and come to consider yourself and who you know yourself to be. And all of a sudden, this dog came in her doggy door, strange dog, just snooped around a little bit, found a doggy bed, curled up, and went right to sleep. The woman liked pets, and she thought that was kind of amusing. The dog slept for a couple of hours and then got up and left. The next day, about the same time, that same dog came in, and this time went straight to that bed, curled up for a couple of hours and slept, went back out. Again, she thought, well, that's different, but she liked pets. The third day, the same thing. The dog came in, went straight to that little bed, curled up for about a couple of hours. But the third day, before the dog left, she wrote a note, and she said, "Your dog has come into my house for 3 days in a row, sleeps for 2 hours, and then leaves. It's okay with me, but I wanted you to know." And she hooked it to this kind of bandana the dog had been wearing, no tags, but it did have a bandana. And he seemed well taken care of, so she hooked it to that and let the dog go. On the fourth day, the dog came back again, same thing, but the dog had a note attached to it, so she went and unattached the note, and the note said, "Thank you. Our dog lives in a home with 3 small children in it, and he's trying to catch up on his sleep. May I come with him tomorrow?" And I thought that was a sweet, cute story because it's very heartwarming. It speaks of the fact that we're all in it together. Richard, would you give me that song? Sort of how we're all in this together. And as strange as it is, on a day where we're social distancing, on a day where I'm speaking to an empty room, we're in this together. And I think there's a felt sense of knowing that. And when we open to our common vulnerability, when we open to our common broken places, when we open to our common desires and can meet each other there, there's something that flows through and out of that connection. Many of you may have seen on Facebook I'm sure you know the entire country of Italy is sequestered, basically. Everyone is being asked to stay inside and social distance. And I had the opportunity to go last fall to Italy, in one town in particular, Siena. It's known for the horse races and the horses there, beautiful town. But I saw a Facebook video in that town, and I remembered how those streets looked. That the people are in their respective places, but the windows are open, and they're hanging out the windows, singing together. And there's just such a sweet feeling that we're in this together. And you know, to me, it's like the Apollo, let this be our finest hour. While I have this opportunity to go within, let me turn within. And how in my life am I taking false refuge? How in my life am I seeking something that's never to be found outside of me? And how can I use this opportunity to discover my connection to my source, my connection to my true self, and my connection to all that is, to all creation, to each and every person? I want to close with a true story that was told by the meditation teacher Jack Kornfield. It's a story about a choir that had been put together in the San Quentin prison. These were some of the toughest inmates. And many of them had been part of a group where they were born again. And as a part of their being born again, they saw Jesus as their Savior, and were really experiencing changes in their lives. And they were starting to perform some as a choir. And they had an opportunity to perform in front of a choir of Tibetan Buddhist monks. And the Tibetan Buddhist monks would then perform for these men. Jack Kornfield wrote, "A friend of mine helped to arrange for a Tibetan monk choir to come to San Quentin Prison in California and to sing with the San Quentin Gospel Choir." Now, the San Quentin Choir is a group of African American men who have gone through incredible suffering in their lives. And they joined this group to sing from the spirit that touched them in solidarity. They joined this as Christians, giving thanks to Jesus, their Savior. So here came the Tibetan monks to sing with these guys. And the day it was meant to take place, the people setting it up became nervous. They were afraid that somehow these guys may feel that their way was the only way, and that the Tibetans were heathens. And the Tibetan men were very small guys who were showing up in skirts, and they just didn't want any drama to play out or dangerous anything to break loose. But Jack Kornfield said the person who had arranged it understood that they shared a connection that would transcend any of that. And so when they showed up, he said, "I want to introduce these Tibetan monks to you. Almost every one of them have been in prison, some of them for years. The Communist Chinese Army not only imprisoned them for expressing their beliefs, but many were tortured as well. Then either they escaped or they were released, and they had to walk over the Himalayas, the highest mountains on earth, many with no shoes or just rags on their feet, in order to find some sense of freedom. But even now, the Himalayan monks, the Tibetan monks, are forced to live in a foreign land, and they cannot go back to their homes and their villages and their temples or to their family, and they don't know if they'll ever be able to return. All that has carried them through prison and torture and escape over the mountains and being in exile is their spirit and their prayers and their God and their songs. And they would like to sing their songs for you now." In an instant, the gospel choir and the Tibetan monks looked at each other with eyes that shared the vulnerable depths of human suffering. And they found understanding. They found a sacred connection. Each group sang to the other from the heart. And when the music was finished, they came together to hug and to embrace like long-lost brothers. It was a sight to behold. It was a blessing to witness. I love that beautiful, true story. Today, we have the opportunity to find true refuge in the living truth, the ultimate truth, that God is our source and it is well with my soul. The ultimate truth through the light of awareness, self-awareness, that we can be aware that even though the storms of life, different weather patterns are taking place, that the essence of who we are and the essence of that in which we live and move and have our being is a presence that we can feel, we can relate to, we can experience, and we can express. And we can find refuge in love, sacred connection, that just like me, this person is wanting to feel safe. Just like me, this person is wanting to be okay. Just like me. Just like me. Just like the men at San Quentin and the Tibetan monks. Just like me, there was a common understanding. And so we move into that place of refuge, of life, of light, of love. And I always like to use and combine music to move into a time of meditative prayer. There's a song that I heard my late friend, the Reverend Sky St. John, sing, and I've never forgotten. And it goes like this. Gentle Spirit, flow in me. Gentle Spirit, grow in me. Gentle Spirit, show in me. Gentle Spirit, know in me. Gentle Spirit, flow in me. Gentle Spirit, grow in me. Gentle Spirit, show in me. Gentle Spirit, know in me. If it's safe for you to do so, I invite you to close your eyes. There's a peace that passes all understanding. There is a presence that abides in all conditions, beyond condition. There is a knowing that emerges and dwells within. That is pure identity. I am that I am. There is an essence, a knowing at the core of every human being. That recognizes itself as part of all that is. It is in that deep, abiding awareness where we take refuge. It is in that deep, abiding truth and awareness that we turn. We go to the rock of our salvation, meaning our wholeness, again and again and again. And as we go within, the kingdom within, as Jesus called it, connect with something that is so vast, so present, so alive, so eternal, that it begins to activate the cells of our being. It begins to spark our remembrance. It impacts our nervous system. We literally feel a sense of safety and calm. The greatest gift we can give ourselves and our world is to take ourselves to this inner sanctuary, the kingdom within, to abide in the place of the Most High, and to be still and know. And then as we emerge into our world, we become the embodiment of refuge. It is well. And this gentle spirit flows. Gentle spirit flows in me. Gentle spirit grows in me. Gentle spirit shows in me. Gentle spirit knows in me. I invite you to keep your eyes closed in that space, and Richard Schulman is going to It was beautiful. So, thank you for being with us today. I hope this has been food for thought, inspiration for finding refuge, and motivation. We want to thank everyone who has tuned in and give you the opportunity online through our Facebook page. We have an opportunity if you'd like to offer a love offering, a gift. It would be greatly appreciated, and so we've made that easy, hopefully, for you to be able to do that. And while you give that consideration, I think it's also a really good practice for us to just remember the power of a gratitude practice. I've been thinking a lot this week about little things that we take for granted, and I hate to keep saying toilet paper, but that's something we normally never give a second thought to, having things like that. We normally don't think about the ability to go out and gather and pretty much go wherever we want and feel safe. We don't really give a lot of thought about if we need to go to the doctor, or will there be room, or will the medicine that I need be available. As a general rule, we don't think about those things. And so it's times like this that give us the opportunity to take that step back and say, I am so blessed, and I give thanks for the many blessings in our lives. So thank you for your support. Thank you for being there for one another. I hope that you will enjoy this beautiful day, and we will keep you updated on events and services and things taking place here. And again, we may have some postponed gatherings, but our services will still be available. They are live and well. It is our joy to be of service to you. So namaste. We're going to sing you offline one more time, This Little Light of Mine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. If you're still watching via live stream, this has been our audience today. So we want to thank you for joining with all of us, and hope you will join us again next